Imagine a world where two rising giants, India and China, quietly shape the future of global power, while the United States watches from a vulnerable position. Every handshake, every border clash, and every trade deal between them doesn't just affect Asia. It shifts the balance that defines America's role in the world. What if the choices made in Delhi and Beijing today decide the strength of Washington tomorrow? Stay with me until the end, because what we uncover about this relationship might just reveal how the future of U.S. influence is being rewritten right now. When we look at the shifting balance of power in today's world, it's impossible to ignore how the relationship between India and China directly influences not only Asia but also the position of the United States on the global stage. For decades, the U.S. has seen itself as the central force in shaping world politics, but the dynamic between these two Asian giants has started to redraw the lines of influence. India and China are not just neighbors, they are two of the most populous countries in the world, two of the fastest growing economies, and two nations with deep historical, cultural, and political complexities. Whenever they interact, whether through cooperation or confrontation, the ripple effects extend far beyond their borders, and America is often one of the most affected players. For Washington, the stakes are high. If India and China lean toward cooperation, pooling their strengths in trade, technology, and infrastructure, they can collectively create a powerful counterweight to U.S. dominance. A strong partnership between them could diminish America's leverage in international institutions, challenge the dollar's global supremacy, and reshape trade networks in ways that no longer depend heavily on U.S. involvement. In such a scenario, America could find itself sidelined in regions where it once set the tone. On the other hand, tensions between India and China can also place the U.S. in a unique position of opportunity. When border disputes flare up or when competition intensifies over regional influence, Washington often sees an opening to strengthen ties with New Delhi. This is why the U.S. has increasingly invested in partnerships like the Quad, which bring India together with other democracies such as Japan and Australia. By aligning itself with India, the U.S. positions itself as a strategic partner in containing China's rise. However, this balancing act is delicate, because Washington knows that if India were ever to improve relations with Beijing, America's strategic calculations in the Indo-Pacific would need a serious rethink. The reality is that India and China's relationship keeps the U.S. on edge because it is unpredictable. Both countries cooperate in certain global platforms like BRICS or the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, signaling that they can work together when it serves their interests. Yet, at the same time, their rivalry is clear in issues like border security, competition for influence in smaller Asian nations, and contrasting visions for global leadership. For the U.S., this unpredictability means that strategies cannot be fixed. They must constantly evolve in response to the shifting currents between Delhi and Beijing. So, when we talk about the geopolitical balance of power, it is not just about military strength or economic growth in isolation. It is about how relationships between key nations alter the larger system. And right now, the India-China equation holds some of the most significant consequences for America's global role. In many ways, Washington's ability to maintain its leadership will depend less on its own direct power and more on how well it can adapt to the changing dynamics between these two Asian giants. And that is why the balance of power in Asia is no longer just an Asian story. It is a defining chapter in America's future. When we shift our focus to the economic and trade dimensions of India and China's relationship, the picture becomes even more striking, because here lies a factor that deeply touches the United States in ways that affect not just policy, but also everyday life for its people. China has long been at the center of global trade, serving as the world's factory and building massive influence through manufacturing and exports. India, on the other hand, has carved out its space in services, digital technologies, and an emerging role in global supply chains. When these two economies interact, whether they decide to compete fiercely or find avenues of cooperation, the ripple effects travel across the oceans and land right at the heart of American economic interests. For the United States, one of the biggest concerns is how this relationship could alter global supply chains. Over the past few years, Washington has pushed for companies to diversify away from China, partly to reduce dependency and partly as a response to rising tensions between the two powers. India has been seen as one of the key alternatives, a country that could offer a large workforce, growing infrastructure, and a government eager to attract foreign investment. If India and China compete aggressively in this space, with both seeking to attract manufacturing and technology partnerships, the U.S. that could benefit by diversifying its economic ties and reducing reliance on a single dominant player. But if India and China choose to collaborate in certain sectors, say in digital innovation, green energy, or regional trade frameworks, the U.S. might find itself locked out of key markets or forced to adapt to rules set by others. There is also the question of trade blocs and regional economic influence. China has already invested heavily in initiatives like the Belt and Road, weaving a network of economic ties across Asia, Africa, and beyond. India has been cautious but increasingly assertive in expanding its own reach, particularly in South Asia and the Indo-Pacific. If their approaches converge even partially, they could establish economic ecosystems where U.S. companies and policies have less sway. This could mean new standards for trade, technology, and even currency use that reduce America's central role in the global economy. At the same time, competition between India and China could bring opportunities for the United States to strengthen its own partnerships. For example, if India pushes harder to attract industries leaving China, Washington could support that shift, both to build a reliable partner and to limit Beijing's economic dominance. The U.S. could also benefit from India's booming digital economy and its alignment with American technology companies, creating new spaces for cooperation that stand apart from China's influence. Yet what makes this situation so impactful is not just the rivalry or cooperation itself, but the scale of both countries. With billions of people, massive consumer markets, and rapidly expanding technological capabilities, India and China are shaping the global economic landscape in ways that no single country, including the United States, can ignore. Every decision they make in trade, every policy they adopt in technology or infrastructure, sets off consequences that ripple through American markets, industries, and households. This is why the economic relationship between India and China is not just a regional issue, but a defining factor in how America will sustain its role as an economic leader in the decades to come. When we turn to the question of security and strategic alliances, the weight of India and China's relationship becomes even clearer, because this is the arena where the United States watches with the sharpest focus. Both India and China are not only regional powers but also nuclear armed states with expanding militaries and growing ambitions in the Indo-Pacific. Whenever tensions rise between them, whether along their disputed Himalayan borders or through competition for influence in neighboring countries, the consequences ripple across the strategies that Washington builds to maintain its own role in global security. For the United States, the way India and China manage their differences has a direct impact on how alliances are shaped, how defense policies are designed, and how power is projected in one of the world's most important regions. China has invested heavily in its military modernization, expanding its naval presence, strengthening cyber and space capabilities, and establishing a more assertive posture in the South China Sea. India, while moving at a different pace, has also been building its military strength, focusing on border defense, naval expansion in the Indian Ocean, and technological partnerships with Western countries. The intersection of these two trajectories creates both friction and uncertainty. For Washington, this uncertainty is critical. If India and China were ever to reduce tensions and build even limited security cooperation, it would challenge America's ability to maintain a strong influence in Asia, because the region would begin to rely less on U.S. support for stability. However, as long as friction persists, the United States finds openings to deepen its ties with India. This is why initiatives like the Quad, bringing together the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia, have become such an important part of Washington's Indo-Pacific strategy. The more India feels the pressure of Chinese assertiveness, the closer it moves toward cooperation with America on defense exercises, intelligence sharing, and joint strategic planning. But at the same time, India has its own independent foreign policy, and it values the ability to maneuver between great powers. This makes it careful not to become fully aligned with Washington, even when it benefits from the partnership. Another layer of this equation is the competition for influence in smaller nations across Asia and beyond. China's Belt and Road projects have extended its reach into South Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, while India has worked to counterbalance this with its own regional partnerships. The U.S. watches these moves closely because wherever China gains influence, America's ability to project power is challenged. If India can push back against that influence, Washington benefits indirectly. But if India and China find areas of compromise, the U.S. risks being edged out of certain regions where it once played a decisive role. In the end, the security dynamic between India and China is not only about their armies, borders, or navies. It is about how their decisions reshape the entire architecture of alliances in the Indo-Pacific. And for the United States, that means its future role as a global security leader will, in many ways, be determined not just by its own choices, but by the shifting relationship between these two powerful neighbors.